Exercise is one of the most potent weapons we have to fight the effects of aging, so I'm going to show you new research on how much you need and what kinds of exercise give you the greatest impact. Finally, I'll share practical tips to exercise the right way so that you can maximize your gains and avoid injuries. And if you want weekly health research summaries and health strategies that I share with my patients, sign up using the link in the pinned comment. When it comes to aging, we see the effects at the macro level, so we notice things like wrinkles, frailty, less energy, but what's driving these changes is happening at the micro level, so within the body's cells. So what does exercise do at that level, and how do we maximize its effects? Well, one impact relates to our mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells. These essential structures convert sugar in the blood to a form of energy that the cells can use. As we age, the mitochondrial function declines and it becomes less efficient, but exercise can reverse that process, restoring and maintaining the mitochondrial function. According to a recent analysis, exercise is the most potent approach for the improvement of mitochondrial health. Exercise also modulates the aging process through its effects on telomeres. So what are telomeres? Well, these are the protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes. They're a bit like the plastic tips on shoelaces that helps keep them from fraying. Each time a cell divides, the telomeres get slightly shorter and eventually they become too short to protect the genetic material. At this point, cells can stop dividing. This is called senescence, so in other words, the cells get too old. And when more and more cells in our bodies reach this state, we increasingly see physical changes of aging. So what evidence do we have that exercise helps? Well, a meta-analysis looked at 7 randomized controlled trials investigating this question, and according to that analysis, the evidence shows that exercise slows the decline in telomere length. There's a third effect of exercise that relates to those senescent cells that we were just talking about, and it isn't just that the cells wear out. Parts of the cells can wear out too, and our bodies have a built-in process for identifying and recycling old, damaged parts. This process is called autophagy, which means self-eating. The buildup of damaged cells and worn-out components is a key part of the aging process, and unfortunately, autophagy slows down the older that we get. It's a bit like having a neighborhood where the trash collectors come less and less often, and once again, exercise comes to the rescue. Though we're still early in our understanding, animal studies have shown a link between exercise and enhanced autophagy. Human studies have also shown promising results. A meta-analysis found that certain types of exercise appear to increase autophagy, and you're probably wondering about which ones. We'll return to that a bit later in the video. Then there's inflammation. This is our body's response to injuries or infections, and it's a crucial response to acute problems, but long-term low-level inflammation can be harmful, and it's this type of chronic inflammation that becomes more likely as we age. It drives age-related problems like heart disease, arthritis, and Alzheimer's. The impact of exercise here is complex, so in the short term, exercise, especially when it's intense, causes inflammation, and this makes sense. One reason our bodies get stronger is that the exercise causes tiny tears in our muscle fibers, and our bodies respond by repairing and strengthening the tissues. Inflammation is a necessary part of this process. Over the long term, however, exercise has an anti-inflammatory effect. So this means that exercise is a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to inflammation. Its impacts can be strongly positive, but there are some pitfalls that we need to avoid so that we don't end up doing harm, and we'll cover those later in the video. Finally, exercise has positive impacts on metabolic health. So here we're talking about things like insulin sensitivity, blood pressure, and cholesterol levels. These aspects of our body's functioning link closely to chronic problems like heart disease and diabetes. These can erode the quality of life and shorten our lifespans. Exercise has multiple positive effects. It regulates insulin levels and lowers blood pressure. So overall, we've got great evidence that exercise is a powerful protective agent against metabolic diseases. With so many positive impacts of exercise, this raises the natural question, how much exercise do we need and what's the right amount to be able to reap these benefits? Well, let's start with the big picture. A standard recommendation is to aim for 150 to 300 minutes of moderate exercise per week, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous physical activity each week. So, moderate here includes things like walking and lifting weights. Vigorous exercise includes running, swimming, playing tennis, and similar activities. And at this level, we're going to see a significant impact of the effects of exercise that we've looked at. But what happens if we push beyond these levels? Well, an intriguing study published in 2022 set out to answer that question. It drew on a huge dataset that included over 100,000 adults followed up for 30 years. Researchers discovered the sweet spot where exercise was associated with the lowest mortality rates, and the amount turned out to be a lot higher than the standard recommendations. So in fact, it was double. The greatest health impacts were seen at those getting 150 to 300 minutes of vigorous activity or 300 to 600 minutes of moderate physical activity each week. So going beyond the normal recommendations can provide additional benefits, but there is a limit. Numerous studies have revealed a reverse, J-shaped curve to exercise benefits. So in other words, we see health improvements to a certain point, then we can actually start to see health decline, suggesting that too much exercise can do harm. And we'll return to that issue in a moment because I want to explain the principles that can help protect us from doing damage from too much exercise. But first, I want to zoom in a little bit. We've just seen that 300 to 600 minutes of exercise a week can boost our health, but most of us value maximizing the effectiveness of time that we spend exercising. Most of us don't have 300 to 600 minutes each week to devote to exercise. So which specific kinds of exercise are most beneficial? Well, it depends on what we're trying to do. Let's say, for instance, we want to target one of the specific health impacts that we've discussed above. A recent meta-analysis looked at mitochondrial health and 3 levels of exercise. The first was low or moderate intensity endurance training. The second level was high intensity training. This could be continuous or broken up into intervals. The third level was sprint training. This included exercise at near maximal levels in short bursts with brief periods of recovery. Researchers found that all 3 categories of exercise stimulated development of new mitochondria. The impact was similar at between 23 to 27%, but there was a big difference in efficiency. Because of its intensity, people who perform sprint interval training, they perform it for much shorter durations than those who perform low-intensity endurance training. So this means that looking at the studies, sprint interval training was almost 4 times more time efficient than the low-interval training. So in other words, we'd have to walk or jog for an hour to get the same benefits as 15 minutes of sprint interval training. But overall, taking the evidence together, we can see that different kinds of exercise have distinct impacts. So in addition to the effects that we've looked at, for instance, endurance exercise seems to have a greater impact when it comes to heart health. And this variety is why the standard recommendation is to include both endurance and resistance training in our regimen. They're both important, especially when we consider the issue of muscle mass. A growing body of evidence shows that as muscle strength declines, total death rates increase. On average, the human muscle mass declines by about 1% per year from the age of 40. So therefore, to prevent muscle loss, we want to maximize muscle strength in youth, maintain that muscle mass in middle age, and minimize the loss as we get older. And to build and maintain muscle mass, we need resistance exercise. Personally, I like to get all of the advantages that I can, which is why I included creatine monohydrate in Microvitamin Plus. But just because I take a supplement does in no way mean that you should as well. Now, resistance exercise looks like the best way to maintain bone density, which is another key issue that we face with aging. Now though, it's time to return to an issue that I mentioned earlier. How can we exercise so that we can get the benefits while avoiding injuries? This is particularly important as we age, as recovering from an injury can take longer. So these are the practical pointers that I share with my patients. The first thing to remember is this: we should start slowly and listen to our bodies. It's tempting to just dive straight into a demanding exercise routine, and we can be impatient to make progress. But this is usually counterproductive. If we start too quickly and get injured, it can take months to get onto the right track. So we should ease into a new exercise routine and give our bodies time to adjust. This is especially true if it's been a while since we've been active. Second, we can use the concept of maximum recoverable volume to find the amount of exercise that's right for us individually. So Dr. Mike Israetel coined this concept, and it's all about finding that perfect balance between pushing your bodies to its limits without overdoing it. So if you exceed your maximum recoverable volume, you're not just stalling your progress, you could actually start losing muscle. It's like walking a tightrope. You want to push yourself, but not too far that you fall off. And the tricky part is that maximum recoverable volume is highly individual. It varies depending on factors like your genetics, training experience, and even how stressed you are in your day-to-day life. Studies show that if we exceed our maximum recoverable volume, we're likely to hit a wall, leading to overtraining symptoms like fatigue, injury, and muscle loss. But on the flip side, if we train below that level, we're potentially leaving gains on the table. The key is to experiment and to adjust our training volume to find our sweet spot. And that means thinking strategically about total volume, frequency, and intensity of our exercise. Let's start with volume, specifically how much training we should be doing to maximize muscle strength. Research shows that training between 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week works well for most people, and some may benefit from higher volumes, so up to 30 to 40 sets, depending on their recovery ability. But the key takeaway is that we need to find the volume that works for us based on our recovery and how our bodies respond to training. As for frequency, how we distribute these sets throughout the week is flexible, so you could do all 15 sets of chest exercises in one session, or you might prefer to spread them out over 2 to 3 sessions per week. The total number of sets and ensuring adequate recovery are what matter most. Now, some people find that they recover better and perform more effectively by spreading that volume out, while others prefer to hit that muscle group hard in one session. I tell my patients to start with fewer sets and gradually increase the volume and frequency based on their body's response. And if we're feeling strong and seeing progress, then we're in the right zone. But if we're constantly sore and fatigued, then it might be time to pull it back a bit. But how many repetitions per set should we do? Is the old school 8 to 12 repetition range really best for building muscle? Well, we used to base these recommendations on the repetition continuum, but recent research has shown that this concept is a bit outdated. While using heavier loads that allow for 1 to 5 repetitions per set before reaching failure is generally recommended for maximizing muscle strength gains, it turns out we can also achieve significant strength gains with lower loads that allow for more than 20 repetitions per set before failure. The overall difference in strength gains between heavy and light loads is actually quite small. One key advantage, though, of using lighter loads is that it reduces the risks of injuries, but the downside is that it takes longer to reach failure, so each set might take more time. But the fact that lighter loads can still offer us benefits makes it easier for us to fit in the needed exercise. This is where the concept of exercise snacks comes in. So for example, on days that I work at the clinic, I don't have time to go to the gym. So during my paperwork breaks, I do a set of bodyweight exercises, such as push-ups. I know that by still getting these sets in throughout the day, I'm stimulating muscle growth. There's also another factor that we need to consider for maximizing muscle strength gains, and that's rest intervals. Research shows that short rest intervals, so less than 2 minutes, with resistance exercise can actually diminish our strength gains. Longer rest intervals allow us to recover better between sets, leading to greater strength improvements over time, and this is especially important if we're focusing on heavy lifting and maximizing our strength potential. Now, in this section, we've talked about training to failure, but what exactly does that mean, and is it necessary for optimal muscle building? Well, training to failure means performing a set until we literally can't perform another repetition with good form. And while this sounds intense, it might not strictly be necessary, or even beneficial for everyone. The evidence suggests that while training to failure can be effective, it's not a requirement for muscle growth, especially if it leads to excessive fatigue and longer recovery times. A study from Professor Brad Schoenfeld found that lifting to failure versus stopping 1 to 2 repetitions short resulted in similar strength gains when training volume was the same. Another study noted that going to failure can actually increase fatigue and delay recovery, which might hinder our progress if we're not careful. The takeaway is that we don't need to train to failure on every set. In fact, leaving a rep or 2 in the tank might allow us to train more consistently and recover better, leading to greater gains over time. So it's a good idea to save training to failure for our last set or for specific exercises where we feel it's safe to push our limits. And to maximize the benefits of exercise, we need to make sure that we're getting enough protein. So make sure to check out this next video here to find out how much protein we actually need and which sources are best.